Hola, chicas. Welcome to Encuentras Your Voice podcast, showcasing Latinas as they share their journey from ancestry to authenticity, discovering that aha moment of self-love and the cultura and the thriving success that follows. I'm your host, Consuelo Crosby, here with you on this first Wednesday of September, gearing up to kick off Hispanic and Latino Heritage Month in just a couple weeks and soaking in that last bit of summer until then. But the heat doesn't stop there, as our guests for the celebratory month are sizzling with their love of the cultura, experiences that we can all relate to, and visions that we champion as Latinas supporting Latinas here in the U.S. Now, today is our 15-minute Pod Club episode for our full-length conversation last week with Fabiola Santiago, indigenous Zapoteca from the Central Valley of Mazatlan in Oaxaca, Mexico, and founder of Mi Oaxaca, whose purpose is to preserve the roots of Oaxaca's indigenous foods and beverage cultures by correcting the modern narrative that we were taught and instead teaching us the indigenous knowledge, science, and practices. Now, if you haven't listened to Fabiola's full-length episode just yet, waiting for that perfect moment, no worries. This episode stands alone and will prompt you to listen and learn from Fabiola in just a matter of minutes. By the end of this episode, you'll be clicking backwards. She is amazingly passionate and gently displays this intimate knowledge of the indigenous communities of her pueblo and their surroundings for us to get a better and truer understanding. And the effect, at least for me, and when you see the video, you'll understand, my mouth is constantly open in a state of shock that I'm so ignorant about knowing the origins and spiritual aspects of mezcal. And even more importantly, my ignorance about the people of the pueblos trying to maintain their indigenous life ways when the threat of appropriation and commercialization is on their doorstep, literally. And that threat is what we're talking about today relative to the infamous Disney Corporation that literally filed for trademark rights for the name and cultural representation of Dia de los Muertos. Yes, it's real. And you're going to hear all the deets in just a few and never be able to look at Disney the same way again. I tell you, this is a game changer to go on top of the full-length game changer from Fabiola Santiago last week. This is something that's not mentioned here in the U.S. as cultural products. Life ways are introduced here by others, not from the origins. Or if the native folk do introduce their culture proudly here as a gracious way of sharing and getting us excited to participate, it is quickly appropriated and used for profit, leaving the original spirituality lost in translation, or maybe not even brought to light. That's why Fabiola and Mi Oaxaca are invaluable in their efforts to preserve, not archive, not as though it were something from the past that's part of a history, but rather preserve the indigenous ancient knowledge to keep it coming forward generation to generation as part of the lifeways. And once you listen to Fabiola's facts and flurries, you cannot unhear them, or the realization of the part we all play in the threat of indigenous cultures, in the threat of native communities, and even politicized countries. There's something about being born and raised here in the U.S. that really deafens us to that reality. We just don't consider the impact of our choices, the impact of our fun times, even the impact of our own heritage as it relates to people that we may never meet. It's how we tread in the world, whether in person or miles and generations apart. And Fabiola really changes our perspective and encourages us to form a new understanding of how we move through the world with this new consideration. And it hit home, literal home for me, because in my own family, I've always loved the romantic story of how my parents met in Arequipa, Peru. They fell in love at first sight and were married there in an intimate celebration in her home. It's a story that movies are made of, given that my mother, who, yes, I'm biased, very beautiful, my mother had an English certificate from Cambridge University, and she was managing the accounting department at the British Embassy. And she's living her best life. And before you think that this was a woman who was raised in an upper class setting and never understood what it was like to come from indigenous cultures, my grandmother is 100% indigenous. If anything, she knew too well what it was like to face the hardships of being indigenous in a country that raises that eyebrow towards a darker person. But here she was living her best life when she meets this roguish American from Wyoming who would be living in a cave in the infamously deserted desert, Atacama. Now, why a cave, you ask? It could have easily been my dad was broke most of the time. No, it was because my father was a geophysicist. Yep, super long term for knowing everything about the earth from top of soil to the center of it. And he was working for this Canadian company called Newmont. And what did that company do? And still does worldwide. It gets contracts in foreign countries to mine their resources and take them out of the country with less than equal compensation. So a romantic story of my own heritage just shattered from this Pollyanna vision that we had always settled on. It is beautifully romantic. This turquoise-eyed American falling for this Peruvian beauty, it just gets a twist that strikes me in the gut and has me reevaluating, wait a minute, what do I come from? And what have I not considered in this beautiful story? But the one feel-good thing about the Newmont connection is that my dad did leave them within a year of marrying my mom, stop the resource stealing, and I'm going to give her the credit for shining the reality of his deeds and the impact it was having on innocent people, because that's totally in keeping with her way of educating him and the brothers when all they see is dollars, educating them to think of how their actions impact other people. Much like Disney. Now, I don't remember this happening at the time it was occurring, but the info crept into my Insta Reels when I was posting about Oaxaca and Fabiola last week. The one thing I have to give Insta's algorithm credit for is bringing this to highlight. So I had to look it up. My engineering mind wanted the facts, not opinions or fancy bait and switch from Instagram Reels. I wanted to know if it was true. And it is, ladies. This actually happened. And you can find it in the LA Times article written by Adolfo Flores in 2013. The year that Disney had a movie in the works, yet untitled, whose storyline was based on Mexican and Latina culture's intimate Day of the Dead. Dia de los Muertos. Now you've got one eyebrow raised, right? Now, they had already made the movie. They just hadn't given it the title at the time of this dirty deed that I'm going to describe. Yes, I'm going that far and calling out the BS in this ridiculously inappropriate appropriation. Now, you can probably guess that they decided to call the movie Coco, but at that time, they were considering the title to be Dia de los Muertos. And since everything is about money and profit when it comes to appropriation, Disney, in 2013, formally filed 10 trademark applications with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office to have the rights to the name and product representation of Dia de los Muertos. Let that sink in. Disney wanted to not only profit off the usage of the term, they wanted to own it so that anyone else would have to pay them to use it with their permission. And we're talking anyone, especially the people who celebrate this day as part of their ancient heritage and cultura. See where this is going? Need to take a shower yet? In the article that is linked here in the show notes that you could read for yourself and give Adolfo his flowers, it says they were trying to protect the name of the movie, which, regardless of that being BS, just totally showcases how ignorant Disney was or is about appropriation of cultural celebration. Now, it's bad enough when other cultures commercialize a spiritual day of great significance. Christmas comes to mind, Hanukkah. But attempting to prevent others from using the term and go after getting legal protection that would have allowed Disney the right to sue on behalf of fraud and counterfeit is such a huge example of the ignorance that runs rampant in the acts of appropriation. I mean, I don't even think it's ignorance at this part. I think it's ego and privilege and the rights to just take from others. Disney is thinking they had the higher power to call indigenous and native cultures frauds for using the name in Spanish of Dia de los Muertos. How is this even possible? And they did file it, and the filing was accepted. No one at the counter just went, no, that's just wrong. You can't do this. It was accepted. But thankfully, according to the article, Stitch Kingdom reported on the filing, and a petition went up on change.org so that everyone became aware of this attempted appropriation. I think I have to start a conspiracy podcast to find out more of these acts that must get buried, or might have even happened, and we won't know because of the media slant here. But thankfully, this didn't happen. The petitions went out, the outrage was heard, and then Disney says, we decided to change the name of the title of the movie, so we don't need that trademark anymore. But still, in their power of thinking, it was our decision to change it. Oh, my Lord. So now you know. Now you can really let that sink in and understand how important Hispanic and Latino Heritage Month really is. With it being only 2 weeks away, we totally have to celebrate loudly, amplify our stories loudly, change the narrative, and educate people of our true heritage. Just like Fabiola and Mi Oaxaca are teaching us to be aware of how people seek to take advantage of our cultural heritage, both within our communities and countries away. So as you're stepping to the platform, as you're given the mic during Latino and Hispanic Heritage Month, really consider how you're framing the conversation. Do your part in leaning in with that Latina power to support and share Latina journeys and businesses and products and all the glorious parts of our comunidad. And do it with love and ease and joy. Don't make this one more thing to do that's going to get too worked up and put you on the edge of burnout. That life-sucking habit of trying to do too much to prove our worth, too much to meet cultural and family expectations, or rise faster than organically possible. Which is what we will be talking about next week in our full-length episode with Ellen Schinke, life coach teaching us how to identify burnout, the different types of burnout, and how to change our ways to lead that life free from the thought intrusion of doing more than we possibly can. Ellen is a burnout coach, a professional who guides burnout and stress management for achievers and probably overachievers. She has a podcast called Burnout Proof that gives tips on life management to reduce and maybe eliminate stress. And what's really fascinating is that Ellen talks from a different point of view than our cultura. So there's so many aha moments in this episode that will just have you sit up and listen because we don't hear it put this way, and there's so much more to learn. It's the perfect episode before this time crush of the celebration this month and holidays that are just up in front of us and putting us in the center of expectations from our jobs and families. But that stress is not coming up this year, ladies. It's going to be totally different for you after listening to next week's full-length episode with Burnout coach Ellen Schinke. Step into your truth, ladies. Ciao. We love that you have subscribed to this podcast and continue to champion women who understand the life of all things Latina. Be sure to follow and subscribe to the Encuentras Your Voice podcast so you don't miss a single episode. They will automatically drop into your listening device each week. And we'd really, really appreciate if you take a moment to add to the reviews that we already have. Tell us what you like, tell us what you're hoping to hear, and we will get there. Share this with your friends and family to help us grow our comunidad, and keep following us on our social media to Encuentras Your Voice. We are so grateful to you for helping us grow this community and would love to learn of all the amazing Latinas who you know are creating the world we thrive in. So reach out to me on social media at Encuentras Your Voice, and let's keep leaning into our authenticity in pride. Help us make Encuentras Your Voice the place where you are 100% represented.